You are standing in the forum, and the sun is white. The procession has been moving for hours. First came the soldiers, their armor clean to mirror brightness. Then the carts of plunder gold worked into shapes you do not recognize. Silks that catch light like water. Weapons that will never be used again. The crowd around you has been cheering in waves, but now the noise changes. It sharpens, focuses. She is walking in chains. This is not described as cruelty. This is described as triumph. The Latin word triumphus carries no moral weight. It is administrative, procedural. A successful general returns. The Senate grants permission. A route is designated. The procession follows legal specifications, the order of prisoners, the display of captured goods, the ritual slaughter of enemy leaders at the Temple of Jupiter. What you are watching is not vengeance. It is paperwork made flesh. The woman in chains was a queen 3 months ago. History remembers Rome as an empire of law, of roads and aqueducts and rational governance, of Latin that became the language of diplomacy, medicine, theology. This is not false, but it is incomplete, because alongside the law codes and the engineering manuals and the philosophical treatises, Rome kept another set of records of what happened to those who said no. Zenobia ruled Palmyra, a desert city that controlled trade routes between Rome and Persia. For 6 years, she governed an empire of her own. She minted coins with her face on them. She declared her son Augustus. She took Egypt, took Syria, took Arabia. Roman historians describe her as cultured, multilingual, ambitious. They describe her as if ambition in a woman were a medical condition requiring treatment. The treatment was Aurelian. Emperor Aurelian marched east in 372 C. Not because Zenobia was cruel, she was not. Not because her rule was unstable, it was efficient. He marched because she had done something unforgivable. She had acted as if she did not need permission. The siege of Palmyra was methodical, supply lines cut, water sources poisoned, surrender was the only available option, and surrender was accepted, and then the accounting began. Zenobia was taken in golden chains. This detail appears in multiple sources. The chains were not iron. Gold is softer, more decorative, less practical. They were not designed to restrain, they were designed to communicate. She was paraded through Rome in Aurelian's triumph, walking for miles so that citizens could see what rebellion looked like when it had been properly processed. Some accounts say she was given a villa in Tivoli afterwards, that she lived quietly, married a Roman senator, disappeared into domesticity. Other accounts do not mention this. They stop after the parade. Either version is a kind of execution. In one, her body ends. In the other, her name does. Palmyra itself was destroyed, not in battle after, systematically. Buildings razed, population scattered. The city that had been a hub of philosophy, architecture, and trade became a strategic lesson. Resistance was not only defeated, it was unbuilt. 3 centuries earlier, in the far wet edges of the empire, a woman named Boudica became a different kind of lesson. She was not a queen by choice. Her husband, Prasutagus, had been a client king, a term that meant Rome allowed him to call himself king as long as he remembered who actually governed. When he died, he left his kingdom jointly to his daughters and to Emperor Nero, imagining this would secure peace. Rome did not recognize his will. Roman officials arrived to claim the territory. When Boudica objected, she was flogged. Her daughters were raped. These acts were not crimes. They were administrative clarifications. The message was clear. Your authority was never real. What followed was not a rebellion. It was a burning. Boudica led the Iceni and the allies south. They destroyed Camulodunum, modern Colchester, killing every Roman citizen they found, then Londinium, then Verulamium. The Roman historian Tacitus estimates 70,000 dead, though Roman historians often inflated enemy atrocities to justify their own. What is certain is that Boudica's forces did not take prisoners, they did not negotiate. They mirrored back exactly what had been done to them, scaled up to the size of cities. Governor Suetonius Paulinus returned with legions. The battle was not close. Roman discipline, Roman formations, Roman military engineering, these were not metaphors. They were technologies of control. Boudica's forces were slaughtered. She took poison before she could be captured. Tacitus writes that she did this to avoid the humiliation of the triumph, to deny Rome its spectacle. But consider what it means that death was preferable, that she chose self-annihilation over being walked through streets in chains. Consider what she understood about what happens to defeated queens in Rome. Her body was never found. Some histories claim her followers hid it. Others suggest it was left to rot, unmarked, irrelevant. The revolt was suppressed. The region was pacified, another term that carries no blood. New governors were appointed. New taxes levied. Boudica became a story Roman mothers told their daughters about what happens when you forget your place. Except the story did not stay Roman. Centuries later, she was resurrected by the British Empire, which needed its own myths of noble resistance. Statues were erected, poems written. She was made into a symbol of British courage, scrubbed clean of context, turned into an aesthetic. The woman who burned cities to avenge her daughters became a postcard. Rome's method of punishment had succeeded beyond its own lifespan. She was erased first, then remade into something safe. But there is a third kind of punishment, quieter than execution, more thorough than parade. Thusnelda was born into the Cruci tribe in Germania. She was the daughter of a chieftain, and she married Arminius, the man who led the Germanic tribes to destroy 3 Roman legions in the Teutoburg forest in 9C. It was one of Rome's worst military defeats. Arminius was never captured. He understood Roman tactics too well. He had served in their army, learned their language, studied their movement. He knew how to disappear. But Thusnelda could not disappear. She was pregnant when Roman forces took her, not in battle. Her own father, Segestes, handed her over. He had opposed her marriage to Arminius. He wanted Roman favor more than he wanted his daughter's autonomy. The transaction was simple. He gave Rome a hostage. Rome gave him legitimacy. Thusnelda was brought to Rome in 15C, displayed in the triumph of Germanicus. She was made to walk while carrying her infant son, Timelicus. Contemporary accounts describe her as dignified, unbowed, as if dignity were something that could be weaponized in chains. After the parade, she vanishes from history. Her son was not killed immediately. He was kept is the right word, until adolescence. Then, according to one fragmentary source, he was executed, or perhaps enslaved. The records do not care enough to clarify. He was a loose end, a potential symbol, a name that might someday be used to justify another uprising, so he was removed. Not as punishment, as maintenance. Thusnelda herself is never mentioned again. No villa in Tivoli, no quiet retirement, just absence. Historians assume she died in captivity, but there is no grave, no memorial, no record. She exists in history only as a thing that was displayed once and then stored away. Her husband, Arminius, continued fighting Rome for years. He was never captured, but his wife and son were always already captured. That was the point. You cannot make a man kneel, but you can take everything he cannot carry with him into the forest. This was not random violence. This was not passion or rage or the chaos of war. This was a system. Rome did not merely defeat its enemies, it processed them. Captives were sorted. Men of military age for execution or enslavement, women and children for display or disappearance, leaders for ritual humiliation. There were procedures for how prisoners should be chained, how they should walk, where they should stand during sacrifice. The Fasti Triumphales, the official list of Roman triumphs, records, dates, generals, enemies defeated. It is a bureaucratic document. It lists women the way it lists tons of grain. The triumph itself was theatre, but it was state-sponsored theatre. The Senate had to approve it. The route was standardized. The audience was mandatory. What looks like spectacle was actually propaganda infrastructure. Rome did not want its citizens to feel pity. It wanted them to feel pride, to understand that this parade of chained queens was what civilization looked like when it functioned correctly. And it worked. For centuries, Rome expanded. It absorbed tribes, cities, kingdoms, not always through direct conquest, sometimes through client relationships, treaties, marriages, but always with the understanding that rebellion had a fixed cost, and that cost would be paid in public. Women were particularly useful for this. A defeated king could be martyred. His death could inspire retribution, but a queen in chains, a queen forced to walk until her feet bled, then given a small house and a Roman name and a quiet life where no one would ever speak her language again. That was not martyrdom, that was revision, proof that her power had never been real, that she had been playing at authority, and now the game was over, and she would live just long enough to understand that. We do not do this anymore. We do not chain prisoners and march them through capital cities. We do not display captives in cages. We have laws, international laws, conventions, human rights frameworks. We have language for what is and is not permissible. We are civilized. But consider what happened to the women of Abu Ghraib. Consider the photographs not taken in secret, but as trophies. Consider how those images circulated not as evidence of crime, but as proof of dominance. Consider how the soldiers responsible were prosecuted not for the acts, but for the visibility. The problem was not what was done. The problem was that it was seen. Consider how asylum seekers are processed, separated, categorized, held in facilities that are not called prisons. Consider the language, detention centers, processing, removals. Consider how the system is not described as cruelty, but as law enforcement, as border security, as necessary procedure. Consider how women who challenge state power are still treated, not in Rome, here, now. How they are discredited before they are silenced. How their authority is questioned, not their arguments, their authority. How they are described as emotional, unstable, ambitious. How the language has changed, but the architecture has not. Rome did not invent this, but Rome perfected it. The triumph was not just a parade, it was a template, a demonstration that power does not need to justify itself, it only needs to be seen. Zenobia walked through Rome in golden chains. Boudica took poison rather than walk. Thusnelda walked and then disappeared. 3 women, 3 methods, 1 outcome. They were not killed because they were dangerous, they were processed because they were symbolic. Their resistance threatened not Rome's armies, but Rome's story about itself. The story that said empire was rational, legal, civilized. That said submission was not force, but inevitability. The chains were part of that story. The parade was part of that story. The silence that came after that too was part of the story. We still tell it. We have different parades now. Different chains. We have language that makes the processing sound neutral. We have laws that make the display look voluntary. We have systems so complex that no single person can be held responsible, which means the system itself is never guilty. And when someone asks what happened to the women who resisted, we check the records. We find that they were handled appropriately, that procedures were followed, that justice in its own way was done.